The worst horror movie I ever saw was fucking great.
Hello and welcome to This May Hurt a Bit. My name is James Strayer and this is...
John C. Myers.
And we are a horror franchise podcast discussing each film in popular and not so popular franchises. And today we are wrapping up our thoughts on the Friday the 13th series. And I'm exhausted. How about you?
Yeah. I need a vacation. I think maybe I'll go spend some time in the woods, maybe camp or something.
I'm going to space. So we watched 11 Jason movies in as many weeks. And how do you feel having started it and now having ended it? And did your excitement die out, or were you continually amazed at where it went?
Amazed isn't the right word, but I was continually baffled by where it went.
Okay.
For a while, it was fun. Like, it was just like, oh, I'm excited about the next one. And then, then after 6, I think it really, I keep in mind how 5 was a rum go, but 7 through X was just kind of like, okay, now what? Now what fresh hell is this going to be? Or I was never bored exactly. I find some of them like hard to watch, not great, but just in terms of concepts, it's so bizarre. It's so strange how like they just can't settle on what they want Jason to be, and that is so wild in what we consider franchises.
The eternal question: Do they need to settle on something, or is it fun to reinvent him every single time? Yeah, and I don't know if I have a strong feeling towards that one or the other, to be honest.
Yeah, I certainly don't like. I'm all for reinvention, and I think that the vagueness of Jason's story opens up a lot of avenues. I just don't think they've ever done it well outside of the basic formula. A lot of it seems like people thinking they know what Jason's about or putting their own spin on it, which is kind of ideal, but at the same time, it's off. It's missing things. Like, it's not, in comic books, I even think we've made reference like this, but there being like Elseworld Jasons or something like that. Yeah. Like, it's like for the remake, for example, where they talk about, we're trying to make a new version of Jason that runs and is a survivalist or whatever. But if you watch the old movies, he was that. You didn't reinvent anything But at the same time, like, I like the idea of trying to take him in new directions. But I just don't think it was ever executed in a way that I found satisfactory.
You almost want to call it like if it was a TV series, it's the Jason of the week. Like, what kind of Jason are you going to get this time? Is he a deadite? Is he a zombie? Or is he just a guy with a bag over his head? Yeah. And I'm of two minds. Like, part of me thinks that's kind of fun, watching 11 different interpretations of him. But just watching 30 years of these films, or maybe closer to 20 or 25 since there was that lull in the 90s. It was still fun to just see how they went from like quiet in the woods, obviously to space, but just like what Jason became in the end, especially with the remake. And I was thinking a lot about the level of brutality in the films and how they did kind of fluctuate. And I think I touched on this in the remake discussion, but I sometimes wonder about if a film's like brutality gets in the way of its almost campiness. And if I'm not convinced that the first couple of films were meant to be campy, or if that's just our lens on them now, or if I would call them full, there's way campier films out there, but or maybe fun. Fun is maybe the right word, I suppose. Can these films still be fun, but also just brutally violent and mean, kind of like the newest one?
Well, I think there's a lot of this you can look at, and we'll eventually be looking at with these different movies, like the way that corporate control can change these things, particularly in the case of Friday the 13th, where it started off as this guy just on his own trying to make this Halloween ripoff. But it's so interesting as it continues on how the studios are like, we need to add more kills, you need to add more stuff. But then you're also fighting against that same structure that's like, no, you can't have the head bounce more than once. You can't have blood squirt out of the sling bag, all this stuff. And I do think particularly in the case of the remake, and I don't mean to keep shitting on it compared to all the other ones, but it's just the most recent one we watched. But it's like that era of like, well, it's got to be brutal and real and gritty. I agree, like puts the focus on that versus more of that being part of the ride, the overall fun of it. And I think there's definitely a way to do both. I mean, part 3 is so ridiculous. Yes. It's so just silly of all the earlier ones. Like, it's just the silliest. It's gags. All of it's kind of just goofy, but it's absolutely fun to watch. And there's brutality in it. Like, there's ways to do it. I think going too far in one direction doesn't necessarily help. But that's my own take on it. There are other people that love that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that may be a good way to put it. Like just going too far in one direction, or or maybe not too far, but just picking that kind of North Star, and we're just like, oh, it's going to be brutal. We're going down that lane tonight.
Well, particularly because you had that in the late 90s, the rise in the screen kind of stuff, where it's the more sort of like wink, wink, self-referential stuff. And I think there was a reaction against that. And so it's kind of harder to find that balance in the later ones. Jason X tries to do that and succeeds decently well. I don't like the movie that much, but it does we're going to be kind of silly with it, but we're going to have some brutal, we're going to have a guy get impaled on a giant drill, but it's still going to be, we're still going to kind of be fun about it.
But yeah, that movie is still trying to have fun. I think that movie's kind of fun, except for the middle 20 minutes or so where they're just kind of wandering around a spacecraft.
Yeah. And it's interesting how my perspective of the movies change from initial viewing to comparing them to the rest of the series or whatever. Cause when I watched the remake, I kind of missed the fun of Jason X.
There you go. Yeah. So do we have a favorite Jason out of all these? I mean, Kane Hodder is the obvious go-to, and I feel like that's fair.
Yeah,
especially even though he was in the worst of the series.
It's tough because I was watching that Shudder series Behind the Monsters, and I was watching the Jason one and talking to the different people, and we've talked about it on the show. I like Ted White as a dude, the killer in 4. He's fascinating. His performance was fine. I'm not knocking it at all, but he didn't stand out the way that Kane Hodder does, and I think part of Kane Hodder's appeal is that by the time he's Jason is legitimately a monster. He is risen from the grave. So yeah, Kane Hodder's definitely up there. But the dude in 3,
Richard Brooker.
I do like Richard Brooker a lot.
I love that guy.
Yeah, that Jason is really creepy to me for a number of different reasons. I talked about him being more lascivious when you see his face, and the physicality he brings to it, I like a lot. So it's a toss up. I think Hodder probably edges him out, but for my favorite non-undead Jason, definitely him.
No, those are my two favorite too. I really like the performance that Richard Brooker brings to it, but then also just I love him as the journeyman actor, the former stuntman. He's just I'm showing up and I'm going to do this job, and I always respect that, especially from an older person that's been in the business for a long time. I like that.
And I'm going to smoke a pipe between takes dressed as Jason.
I love that. Yeah. And sticking up for the actresses that are stuck in the middle of a boat out in the middle of nowhere.
That stuff is so great. Him and again, like Ted White being there for their fellow actors, particularly young people that don't know what they're doing and can easily be taken advantage of in a situation.
I think one advantage that Kane Hodder had too to become the most beloved, and this is not a knock or to take away from him at all, but I think it's fair to say that by the time he took on the role, it was obviously a pretty iconic, face, but then also he really hit the con circuit too. And he had the absolute enthusiasm to keep up with all the fans. And I kind of feel like that is almost as important as your on-screen portrayal. Yeah. If you show enthusiasm and love towards the people who are watching it, they're going to keep following you along. And I think that's pretty impressive.
Well, it's also he's just a dude that loves what he does. I saw some interview with him, just some jerk with a YouTube channel, whatever. And then Kane Hodder starts off by pretending to punch him in the head. And then it's that didn't even hurt. How did you do that? And Kane Hodder, he's just excited about what he does. And I always love that. I have personally, I've met, there's a filmmaker I know who worked on the movie Roar, which is an insane movie with live lions. Look it up. It's bonkers. The movie itself is just weird, but he worked on the first movie Bjork was in. But he is he's completely unpretentious, and he's so excited to tell you about all of it, not to name drop, just because he loves what he does. And that's so infectious to me.
That kind of enthusiasm is, it's so exciting.
If he's bringing that to the cons and stuff like that, people are going to definitely gravitate to him.
Sticking with our favorite Jason, do we have a favorite final girl?
I probably will go with Amy Steele as Jenny. I think as far as the ultimate, I like her confidence and her, she kind of has her head together the whole thing. I think she's not driven to that point of violence as much as some of the other people, backed into a corner. I think she's just clever and interesting. That being said, though, I do like Chris Higgins for part 3, just the completely damaged protagonist at the end of a movie. I'm always a sucker for, because she never shows back up. So Dana Kimmel is Chris Higgins. I kind of love because she just, this broke her. She overcame this thing, but to what end? She still lives in this awful world where this happened.
Sure.
And it made the horror much more, brought it home a lot more. Those two are probably my favorite. I mean, I like all of them to a degree, but it's probably Amy Steele, Dana Kimmel, and then Adrian King, I think would be top three.
I think I'd agree with that. No Carrie in there for you?
No. I mean, a lot of the later ones kind of, I don't dislike them for the most part, but
right,
they just didn't really.
There's not a lot to do.
Yeah, it just didn't do it for me the way the other ones did.
I mean, and on that note with the characters, I mean, what is a common thought about a lot of these type of things is. Do we want our teenagers, do we want our protagonists to be more developed or less developed? Do we want to see them line up as cannon fodder, or do we want to see them having interpersonal relationships, such as part 4? If it gets too involved in that kind of drama, does that detract from the fun? I kind of learned my lesson a little bit because if you remember, I was a little bit bored through some of the drama in part 4. But then as the series went on, I kind of pined for it because they were clearly drawn characters. And I think that's a lot more effective.
Yeah, I think that's just generally true with the series as it goes on. It becomes so much more Jason focused, which I get. That makes it people want to see Jason, and that's fine. But I do think it loses a little bit because even as thinly drawn as the characters are in the earlier ones, they're still a bit more interesting than what comes later. There's some idea that there might be humans outside of this situation.
Yeah.
In thinking about this question as we've gone on, I immediately think of the dude in Jason Takes Manhattan, Sean, who they attempt to give a backstory to with his overbearing dad, who's not at all overbearing, and then he's just there.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't matter. They just have all these archetypes that they barely sketch out, and I don't know. I think some of it's also just as these things, as you move on, there's a tendency to want these movies to get bigger.
Sure. And
as a result, you have more cast, and as a result, you can't spend as much time with them. In the same way that in part 2, half the counselors are we're leaving. We're going to go drink in the city. Yeah. They just alleviated that problem, which now looking back at it, I was kind of that's dumb, but now I'm that was a wise move because that's effective. You gave the illusion of growth, but you're still focusing on just a core group of people.
With the characters too, I don't find Tommy Jarvis that interesting. I don't find him that interesting to last a three movie arc there. I liked him in part 4 as a kid, and I can't believe I'm saying that because usually I don't like kids in horror movies, but I feel maybe it was just the constant recasting, but he was just completely inconsistent over those 3 films.
Even taking out 5, because 5 its own weird thing. Even if you jump from 4 to 6, him in 6 is not that interesting because the movie is not that interested in him. He's just there to be the guy that's going to get Jason. Where I think 5 wanted to do that, have that balance more of this guy is screwed up from Jason, but really unsuccessfully tried to explore that. Is never a question of whether or not he did it, as we talked about. So it's interesting that he managed to be a 3 movie guy because as far as the final person goes, not that compelling.
He's not quite Laurie Strode here. I feel Laurie Strode is obviously probably the most famous protagonist up against, these franchise killers. Nancy's pretty famous from Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't feel like Tommy Jarvis comes up that often.
He doesn't, yeah.
He's kind of forgettable.
Yeah, I mean, because he shows up about midway through the series. There's, it's a clear attempt to try to do something with him. And then those 3 movies are rocky because you have what might be, one of the best to one of the worst to it's fine, and so it's hard to want to root for him, particularly because I can't speak for some of these other franchises yet, having not seen them all, but I know Laurie Strode, at least for the first 2, they're no, Laurie's involved, and then I know at least that Nancy shows up in part 1 and part 3 of Nightmare on Elm Street, so that there's a clearly established thing at the beginning. So it's easier to identify them with the killer as this is the back and forth there. Whereas in Jason, it's Instead of the monster of the week, it's the survivor of the week.
Yeah, right. Yes. Batman and Joker, Sherlock and Moriarty, and Jason and Tommy Jarvis.
Yeah. Like it's more like Batman and Egghead, it's
yes. Yeah. In a world where you're not doing another marathon, which, I don't know when you're going to sit down and watch 11 of these in a row again, which would be the two that you would pull out. And maybe it doesn't have to be your favorite one, but it could be like this is solidly entertaining.
Yeah, a 3 and 4, I think. And not necessarily in that order. Like in those two, I think are my favorite.
I think mine too. Yeah.
I think having watched them all in a row, I have a special affinity for part 1, even though it's not my favorite.
Sure.
So that one would probably be in the running. But I mean, so many of them for the first 6 anyway, even including 5, as much as I don't like it, I'd be willing to just like throw on while I'm doing other things. Have that playing in the background. But if I'm going to like sit down and watch something, it would probably be 3 or 4. How about you?
Yeah, 3 and 4 is definitely it for me. And I think that is in line with most of fandom. Mm-hmm. Don't come to this pod for super hot takes, I don't think. But, this is, 3 and 4 are so clearly the hit makers here. And I don't care. I think the 3D gags are hilarious.
Yeah.
And I love how just nonstop they are. Every single one is funny.
It just fits with the spirit of the whole thing so well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just ridiculous and it's so fun. And fuck hot takes for the most part. Like particularly doing any research on any movie post 7. Everything was always like, here's why it's actually good. And some poor schmo got paid $5 to write it so that some website can generate anger clicks. That shit's dumb. Some of these movies aren't worth defending. So, if you have a legitimate thing, sometimes that's interesting, but generally that's not the case with these. I remember particularly reading one really grating one about Jason Goes to Hell. It's like, you are just struggling to fill paragraphs. I don't know a situation where this would be happening, but if I was somewhere that I could watch Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan without sound, I could just look at it like while this stuff's happening. I'd put that on because I love the way that movie looks.
At a bar.
Yeah, totally.
Just at a bar in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
So with all of those, and kind of considering the films as a whole, do we think that there are like rules of this universe that are important? I lean no, except because they constantly change.
Yeah.
Whether it be like Jason's invulnerability, his location, and I guess on the heels of, are the rules important? Is his location important? Do we still care about Jason in these new locations?
It's tough. I want to say that the only rule is the location, in as much as that Jason is scariest because he's master of his domain. Like he knows Camp Crystal Lake, and they tried to explain that in the remake with like, well, he's got underground tunnels he can bilocate.
Sure.
But I love the feeling in 4 of him just being kind of part of the woods. I like 6, them kind of elevating him to this demon of nature that, there's mist and stuff like that. It's almost an elemental entity.
Yes.
I think that matters a lot because I think the most unsuccessful ones are when they take him out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, I don't know that there's hard and fast rules. I would complain frequently about like, well, this doesn't seem like Jason. Only in the sense that I think when he's out of his element, I start thinking about that more. If you start like to explain a little bit of it, then it all kind of falls apart. But if you're like, no, this is kind of, as long as he's in this area, it's fine. It's like I always think about,
just keep him in the woods.
I always think about in Futurama, like I think in the commentary for it, they talk about like Bender being like, we can do whatever with him. His insides can be whatever because we don't ever explain it. And as long as we can never explain it, it's fine.
So don't over-explain Jason by calling him a Deadite, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Unless you're specifically making a Deadite Jason, which they did. But that's it. And even then, like, I don't know, because if you want to see movies in the future with Jason, it's kind of hard to be like, because essentially, like, Jason's a ghost story where it's like, this part's haunted, you go to this thing, but like you eventually, like, people keep having to show up. And I'm sure this is something we'll deal with when we get to Amityville, where it's like, how many idiots keep coming to this stupid place? And finding that an excuse to do that is pretty tricky. But I think they managed it with the first 4, which are the most connected, where they attempt to tell like a through line. I think maybe that's the big difference. Now that I'm saying that out loud, is that those first 4 are like connected. Whereas everyone after that, it is just Monster of the Week for the most part. I mean, 6 and 7 are connected through the endings where Jason is, and then 7 and 8 sort of. But it does feel more like, because like time wise, there's time jumps. It doesn't feel as connected.
Yeah, I think of all the times that we've changed the rules or changed the setting, if we're thinking about those films, I think Jason X does it the best. I just enjoy the big stupid monster on the ship, and it just scratches an itch that I'll always have for, like, you know, a space horror type of thing. And not that it was particularly scary, obviously, but just putting him as this unstoppable force on a spaceship worked for me, and I think the tone of the movie worked a little bit better than some of those other ones post-4.
And I said on the episode how unfair I was to Tom McLaughlin about part 6. But I do like that part 6 explicitly went, this is a new Jason, and this is why it's a new Jason. Like there was a clear like dividing line in the sand of like, he is struck by lightning and he's this Fulci zombie now. He's this undead monster. So we're going to treat him as such. That's fine. Like, that's cool. I think because so many other ones are just like, oh, I guess he's this now. Don't worry about it. You know, like that was part of my big issue with 9 is that like, no, he's just been like this. No, he hasn't. We've had 8 other fucking movies, man. Like,
body jumping.
You can't do that now. Whatever. Or at least not you can't do it without setting it up a bit more. Not just being like, no, it's not what you've seen. Like, trust me.
I don't think that, you know, not having a whole bunch of backstory to him and rules to him, none of these slashers are particularly like sympathetic, but occasionally they would try to make him sympathetic by being like, oh, he was a small boy. Yeah. He was a, you know, disfigured boy, when, you know, and all of that. And I've read some articles and interviews with people who are just like, yeah, I really related to Jason because I got picked on in school too. It's like, I feel like it's reaching to be sympathetic with a machete wielding maniac.
Sure. I mean, like, maybe for part 2, but like, 6 movies on, it's like, you're over it. You're just being a dick now. Men will do anything but go to therapy. They'll murder campers instead of go to therapy. No, but I do think like if you take the big horror icons of these franchise pictures, Jason is in theory the most sympathetic because like Michael Myers, pure evil. Like the psychologist says, just pure evil. Freddy, child rapist, awful, terrible guy, invading dreams. Yes. Jason, like, was he maybe drowned and then his mom murdered people and he saw his mom get killed and he was disfigured or something. There's a little bit more pathos compared to everybody else. But at the same time, it's not enough to justify that. At the same time, it's one of those, like, you just want to do the violence against people you don't like, and you're finding this to be a convenient excuse. He's just it. He's just this guy was mean to me, so I'm going to crush him. And that's fair of several slashers, you know, like the revenge aspect of it. But at a certain point, like, it clearly stops being revenge and is just, he's a force of evil.
Fun.
Yeah.
So I think it is important that we revisit the kill count from the beginning of this series.
Oh boy.
So now I went back and I re-listened to the first show. Your guess was 106. Oh my God,
I've got to be so under.
Mine was 111, and we are doing Price is Right rules, closest without going over.
Right.
We're calling it overall kills, not necessarily Jason kills, because especially in this series, all of part 1 is Pamela.
Right.
Part 5 don't count.
True. Yeah.
I just went with total in the entire series. There are conflicting numbers out there.
Yeah.
Because there are different cases to be made for some of these things.
Yeah.
Total 203.
God, yeah. Way off. I'm sorry I underestimated you, Jason. I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Please don't kill me.
203 kills.
Wow.
In the Friday the 13th series, 170 of them done by Jason himself.
Wow.
If we're going to go from that.
Wow.
So, gosh, I know that could be off by plus or minus 5, depending on a few different factors. I would say don't write in and correct me, but hey, go ahead and write in and correct me. It lets me know that people are listening.
Yeah. Which I do need to correct. I think it was in the last episode I mentioned that Mike DeLuca wrote one of the Friday the 13th. He wrote one of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. But he also wrote In the Mouth of Madness, and I recorded a different podcast about that week, and I got confused.
Oh, that makes sense.
So correction corner.
Okay, that makes sense.
But so don't correct me, just write in correct Jim. I'm infallible, and part of that infallibility is recognizing when I'm wrong. Jim,
Yes.
Horrible. Will not back down.
Horrible about that.
Right him and
I do not bend. Actually, anybody that knows me is completely the opposite. So, yeah.
I do not bend. Yes, you do. Yeah, I do.
I do bend. 111 to 106 to 170/203. Now, I do think that, especially considering that there are a lot of these films and the fact that that the latter half of this series the mandate was up the kill count, up it. I have a feeling that this is the highest of all of these type of films. I think Jason Voorhees takes the cake for highest kill count of all the franchises. Having just watched the trailer for the new Michael Myers movie, now that there's a whole bunch of those remakes, and those are all about being brutal. Yeah. Yeah, so that could eclipse. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, Jason is the king right now. Going by Mario Kart rules, you just won the Jason Cup. We'll see how this goes. We'll keep a little trophy case going. Yes. But right now, James wins the Jason Cup. Congratulations. Yeah. Jason Cup. So out of those 203 kills, what was your favorite kill? That is tough. Because there's 203. There's 203 of them. I mean, there's just a few different ones because there are certain elements that I like about different kills. Like I love the way in 4 it looks when he throws one of the twins out of the window. I love that shot, but it's just, and then the car explodes. That's ridiculous. Yeah. But it's not necessarily my favorite kill because I like the more absurd ones. Like I like the harpoon coming at the screen. I like the eyeball popping out of the guy's head in 3. Oh, yeah. The guy going down the drill in 10. Man, that's tough. It's tough to pick a great overall, but generally, it's not going to involve the machete or something like that. It's going to be, because even when he gets, even in 7, when he kills her mom with because the doctor throws him in front. I love that kill just because how shitty the doctor is. So it's a tough call, but honestly, it's probably the sleeping bag kill in 7. Tied with the sleeping bag kills in 10 in X. They're so ridiculous, but they're just so particularly 7, I think, captures the spirit of the whole thing really well. Yes. I shouldn't say that because initially, the part that sold the original Friday the 13th was the gore, but I think the fun of him just bashing someone in a sleeping bag is great. And that feels cartoony enough and less, brutal and mean. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with the sleeping bag. I would definitely, I guess the one machete one that I would be all for is the wheelchair one in part 2. Yeah, because of the long flight of steps, because the flight of steps becomes comical after a point. It's absurd. That's a great one. The dry ice in part 10. Dry ice? Yeah. It's not dry ice. Liquid nitrogen or whatever. Liquid nitrogen. Yeah, there we go. That one. This might be my absolute favorite, though, is part 3, the handstand and the machete that comes down. Even though you barely see it, there's so something about it's something about the way it's filmed and the artistry that had to go into that one, and putting up the plexiglass and all that kind of stuff really gets my brain going. So that might be my favorite one, especially also the poor kid gets stuffed up into the rafters afterwards. You just feel the body hit the floor. There's something so forceful and visceral about that one. So that might be my favorite one, especially if we're going to talk the dark horse favorite. Yeah. Well, so that's your favorite Jason kill. Who's your favorite Pamela kill? Oh, good gosh. I got to go back 11 weeks and think about Pamela. All of those are just camera POV, poke. Yeah, pretty much. Stick, those are a little bit less memorable. Oh, part 1 would be Kevin Bacon, though, right? The Kevin Bacon kill is pretty impressive. I also like when Bill is pinned to the door with because you don't see it. He's just that's a great reveal. Getting past all of our favorite kills. how could we see this series continuing? Because I'm sure that as soon as the legal woes are taken away, and depending on how fans count Freddy versus Jason, if that is a Jason film, we are looking at literally the 13th in the Friday the 13th series, and that is just money on the table right there.
Yeah.
How does one go about rebooting, continuing, whatever?
Well, so there's been this lawsuit that's been stopping everything for quite some time. But basically the producers argued that Victor Miller, the screenwriter of the original one, was an independent contract and had no claim to the rights. He won a copyright termination appeal, meaning that the rights to the characters and locations found in the original Friday the 13th movie were his. They reverted to him. But that means he doesn't have the right to the adult Jason or the hockey mask.
Wow.
And what my favorite thing about all of this, by the way, is that in every research, everything that I've read about it, they always talk to Larry Zerner. Larry Zerner played Shelley in part 3 and is now an entertainment lawyer. And so I love that. He's not necessarily representing either side in the case, but just he knows copyright law. Man, we've made fun of Shelley a bit here and there. We poked fun, but good for Larry Zerner. That stuff's great.
Yeah,
essentially,
I'm sure you can take it.
As the result of that, Victor Miller owns U.S. rights to the first script, and so Sean Cunningham owns adult hockey mask wearing Jason, but legally can't use him without Victor's permission. Also, at the same time, there's so does Victor do a stuff with child Jason and Pale Voorhees, like they made that Bates Motel show? Please don't do that, because I don't want Jason to explain any more than he has been.
No.
But Sean Cunningham right now is it's 50-50 on whether or not we would make a movie. There was a period of time where LeBron James was interested in acquiring the rights.
I remember
which is
that,
wild, and I love that. But hopefully they come together, because it's basically, I think Sean Cunningham was saying to make less money because he'd have to pay Victor Miller for this stuff. But I also don't know who owns Friday the 13th now, that actual term, because there was the whole thing with Paramount and New Lines and all this stuff is so stupid. But so I don't know. So neither one is budging. Basically Larry Zerner had also said that, well, hey, in 53 years it'll be public domain, then anyone can make the movie. So if we just wait 53 years, provided the planet doesn't die, we'll get a new Jason movie. So
reason to stay alive, folks.
Yeah. So I don't know. We talked before about a found footage Jason, which would be interesting. Yeah. I would like a return. Enough time has passed if they even want to do another legacy sequel, or sort of reboot kind of thing. I wouldn't necessarily be against it. It is interesting. This was pointed out recently to me. I didn't think about it, is that era of your Jasons and your Freddys was a different era of slashers, in that slashers up until that point were generally people. They were more like whodunits. They were individuals, where this was more like fantasy, like monsters and stuff. Yeah. Whereas that's always what I associate slashers with is more because eventually Michael Myers became a monster, but at least in the first two. But we'll get there when we get there. I wouldn't mind seeing more Jasons. I mean, what the hell? We're wringing the life out of any and all IPs. I haven't seen a Jason in a while. What the fuck? Let's bring Jason back.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously they'll have to, make the teens very today teens, which means there will be kids out in the woods making TikTok videos and stuff like that, which will annoy me, but only because I'm old. But you have to bring it up to date like that, I guess. I don't know if I want to see one that's set in the 80s, because everybody's so 80s obsessed these days. Yeah, that'd be. I'm curious how that would look. There's a part of there's a morbid curiosity for me about how that would look. And it does eliminate a lot of those problems, because that was one of my, and we'll talk about it when we talk about it, but that was part of my beef with the new Texas Chainsaw, was the modernizing was real bad. But I still think there's a way to do it, and because I think that it's super easy to just be like, oh, we don't have signal. If you want to take the easy coward's way out, but they would definitely have to modernize somehow. But I think coming back to the woods, however you approach that, would be a good way to do it. Yeah. And I'd want them to have a little bit more fun. I'd want them to pull back maybe on the brutal and get a little fun. Part 3 is definitely the way I would go. Make it a crowd pleaser. Yeah. Not a dark, gritty thing. I should asterisk what I was saying in that, I'd like to see a new Jason, but I would like to see a new Jason outside of the winky meta stuff that we've got going on. Oh, where it's go. I think you're going to end up I will give credit to the 2009 remake of being
we're going to combine all these movies in a way that doesn't necessarily like be like, huh? Look at this. Remember this?
Yeah, there you go.
It tends to be less about remakes and stuff like that. It tends to be so much more like we have to nod to the fans and let them know, pat them on the head and say, you get this, right? You're good for liking this.
Yep.
Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Yep. For our wrap up, we also wanted to talk to one of you, or a friend of ours for several years, who is also quite knowledgeable about Jason. So let's throw to him.
It only seemed fitting we talked to the biggest Friday the 13th fan I personally know, artist, actor, raconteur, man about town, Greg Bigoni.
Hi, Greg.
Oh, thanks,
how you doing,
man?
Greg?
I'm doing all right. I'm honored to be a part of this. I've been enjoying listening to you watch the movies, many of them for the first time.
Hey, because you have seen these a ton, right?
Dozens of times, most of them, except for the few that I just really can't stand. But throughout this process, I have been sending John texts saying, "Oh boy, the last one is a real pile of shit."
I'll check in with Greg about my various watchings.
They get pretty rough after 6.
Well, yeah. Well, it's interesting because and we've talked a little bit about it on the show about how like they wanted to kill Jason after 3, then they keep bringing him back.
Yeah,
and each time it seems like, I don't know. Does he do this? I guess we'll do this. It's very much like
at a certain point they stop even trying to explain it.
That works for me, frankly.
I mean, if he gets melted into a chubby child in the sewer at the end of part 8, like that's way more far-fetched than any reason you could come up with to bring him back in 9. So he's just there.
I very much, and maybe it's just being from the Midwest, I very much like the solution to that being, we're just not going to talk about it. We're just going to move on. Just that didn't happen. Don't worry about it. I love that.
Even just bringing in any kind of explanation was like too taxing, like more than what audiences were wanting. And that's one thing I do like about them, especially in the summer. I associate them with the summertime so much, and that's often I will rewatch them. Then it works for a time when it's hot and your brain cells are kind of diminished.
Sure.
And, but it seems to know that most of the time. It's very rarely a pretentious series.
Yeah. And I think that's where it runs into problems, is when it starts kind of trying to be more than it is, I guess. Because it's still like, I forget what I saw that someone made this comment where it's like, they're all very different, but they're all the same.
Yeah.
And that's true, and I don't mind that. Like, until it starts being too different.
And you guys skipped Freddy versus Jason, but you'll find when you do get to it, like 85% of that movie is just the characters like breathlessly explaining the plot to each other, because it doesn't make any sense. And instead of letting it be creepy and ambiguous, they're just constantly saying, "Oh, don't you see? This thing is happening," and then they'll describe some elaborate thing that like it doesn't even make sense in the context of the movie. Why would they have figured this out?
Sure.
That's something to look forward to. I think Jason is at his best when he's just there. Like, there's not too much explained about him. I don't need much, because it's already ridiculous that he's dead but alive when you're first introduced to him.
He lives in the woods and he doesn't like people being there.
I had a whole thing I didn't get to when talking about the new Jason, that he was actually like the whole thing was about socialized medicine, basically, that Jason just lived in constant pain. His only solution was weed, but they made that illegal, and he didn't have money to get health care, and so
it is heavily
he had to
implied
fight
in the
for it.
remake that Jason is a weed farmer.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like, oh well, he's just stealing kerosene from that guy, but no, he was there to protect the weed.
Totally.
When Wade went over there.
Yeah.
Did you grow up watching these?
I grew up in a very restrictive household. I wasn't even allowed to watch Facts of Life, for God's sake. the one sitcom that was acceptable was The Cosby Show, and I guess that backfired. But we would go to the video store a lot, the little mom and pop hole in the wall. This is like pre-Blockbuster, at least pre-Blockbuster being a real phenomenon. Usually would get something like a Disney movie or something like that. But, the horror section was very enticing. I would go and stare at the horror covers, never dreaming that the covers are so much better than the content of the actual movies.
So often.
But as a result, like I was very imaginative as a kid, and really just the gore and the craziness on those covers. I still love them to this day. There's certain images that have stuck with me. The dude's head in the refrigerator in Frozen Terror, or the hair noose in April Fool's Day.
Yep.
And then later I ended up working at video stores, and it was around that time that I started watching them a lot because I didn't have to pay to rent them. And I'd always had a certain curiosity about the Friday the 13th series. At the time, they were the most depraved shit you could imagine. Mm-hmm. And now, if you watch, like, basic cable outdoes it now. I mean, an average episode of Fargo or something has more visible gore in it than most of the Friday the 13th movies, and even more language in some cases. So it's very quaint to look back now and think, wow, this was a big deal, or this was really hyped as being this really super scary thing. And then, of course, I just found them really fun to watch. And, working as I did at Movie Madness, which is the iconic video store here in Portland, Oregon. I worked there for a few years and found, my people who also had seen them all a million times, and people would just drop random dialogue from Friday the 13th Part 5 into casual conversation. It's like, wow, I've never met anybody who did that before.
Yep.
You ever get the guy who played Shelley showing up, dropping dialogue, hoping you'll recognize him?
Hey, remember me, guys?
Hey, come on.
So you want to go skinny dipping, and I'm not skinny enough. It's like, you still got to pay your late fees, Shelley.
Greg, do you have a favorite one? Do you have one, like, okay, I'll give you two options because this is always difficult, but, like, do you have a favorite one? And then do you have one where you're just like, well, I'm not in the mood to do the entire series, but I'll go back to this one this weekend?
I think the best ones for me, I like Part 2 and Part 4. I think they kind of do the best at maintaining some sort of story structure and suspense. I mean, maybe not compared to, like a Hitchcock movie or something, but compared to the rest of the movies in the series and the 80s slashers in general, I think those ones are really effective. And if I'm in the mood to just watch something idiotic, number 5 is the go-to, which I know you kind of killed your guys' souls. If I were seeing it for the first time now, I don't know that I would enjoy it quite so much, but just something about it's just trash, and it just makes no sense, and the acting in it is mostly terrible. There's the big scene with the mayor throwing a temper tantrum in the sheriff's office. God, that's funny to me. That guy is so ridiculous. It's colorful. Let's put it that way.
It has its place in canon, definitely.
It's really obnoxious. Ethel and Junior may be the worst characters in any movie ever.
So bad.
But it's like, that's amusing to me how terrible it is. And the fact that it is constantly introducing characters only to kill them after they have like 2 lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
And as you said in your podcast about it, your review, like, it seems like, okay, they keep introducing red herrings. Well, it's not really a red herring if he dies 2 minutes after he first appears. It's just like a series of blackout sketches where these people we've never met before just introduce, show their boobs to themselves in a mirror, as women do, and then get like an axe to the gut, Yeah,
like I was watching this movie last night. It was very bad, called Hell High, and there's a scene in there where the teacher that they're terrorizing is taking a shower, and she's really enjoying taking a shower, like for no other reason than
just really lingering on soaping up the boobs.
Yeah, I'm 32, and I just discovered I had these, I guess. 5 I don't love, but particularly like looking towards the end of the series and how much I disliked the remake.
Right,
it makes me like Ethel and Junior a lot more. It's like, well, they brought them on to be ridiculed and dumb, and they also minimized that a bit, whereas in this one it's like, no, spend a lot of time with these people. They're cool and good.
Yeah, it seems that at a certain point, certainly when they were doing the remake, somebody involved said, oh, well, the audience is always the most crazy happy and enthusiastic when the most annoying character gets killed because they've been waiting for this. What if we made every character super annoying, and then they'll really love the movie? Like, well, no. because then I'm watching annoying assholes for an hour and a half. If I get the sense that I want them to die the whole time, I don't want to watch people that I want to die.
It's fun when there's like maybe one of those characters or something like that, but even then, like, have him be a human being.
That's one of the things that I like about 2 and 4 is that they do that. Those are, I think, some of the more likable victims in the series and interesting victims.
Definitely. Yeah, especially watching the rest of them. I remember I got in this rewatch, I was a little bit bored with some of the teenage shenanigans going on in part 4, but looking back on it now, I crave that. Now I want more of that.
It's like an after-school special almost.
Oh, totally.
Just they are setting up these teenagers as, there's some teen drama in it, but it's not as over the top as it is in like the remake. And it's not as bland as it is in the first one, where I love, like, by the remake, they're really over-sexualizing everything and just wringing every drop of innuendo out of every scene, every sentence. Everyone's super, super horned up. And then you go back and you watch part 1 and it's so muted, and Brenda says, like, you know what we're gonna do, we're gonna play strip Monopoly, and she puts the board down and she's that enthusiastic about it, and they're like, oh, okay,
sure,
like that's the sexy moment in part 1,
right?
Well, it's funny because I was watching this thing that I'm talking about, if slashers are postmodern or just like camp, like have they always been self-referential? And they kind of have been, but one of the things was that the Scream in that of the 90s, that wave of teen slashers got a lot of credit for being like more focused on women and
as protagonists,
stuff like that, and as protagonists, but also like the real struggles they have and stuff like that. They're not just like more like the women's gaze versus just the male gaze kind of thing. Like it's women as spectators of these movies and what they might like.
Well, and Kevin Williamson was a gay man writing them, so that might have something to do with it.
There was a lot of the movies that came out during that time were helmed by queer people, but or had some involvement. Whereas like this one, the remake in particular anyway, is so like hypersexualized versus everything else before. Like it's there's not even like, let's try to make them real people, poorly sketched maybe, but real people, versus just like, no, they want to see horny teens.
Yeah, it's a movie that made Michael Bay say, this is a bit over the top.
Yep.
Yeah. Which is wild. How do you toe that line? Because it's like, well, people want to, this is part of the appeal of this thing, is this sort of exploitative bit of it. And that's fine. And then, but how do you ride the line where it's not too much, but not enough? Right. Or, and then in the case of like part 5, does it have to be Jason? And
or
the
takeaway from it is anything in common, even with the tones of the previous movies.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, certainly look at 6 and look at 2, and they're very different. But I do think that you could still get away with doing it. Maybe not Jason, but just the movie was so badly done in that regard. How do you,
right?
You know what I mean? You can't blame it on the concept itself, even though that's what people wanted to see. But if you would set that up a little bit better,
there was a lot of cocaine on that set.
Yeah, a lot of people going like, "Great idea, let's do it." That sounds awesome. I know you just did the recent run of Friday the 13th art, but has Jason been an inspiration for you in a lot of your work previous to that?
Sort of. It seems almost like just going back to those covers at the video store, I just think, much more lurid than the movies themselves. I think those kinds of tableaus have inspired a lot of my stuff. I didn't draw a lot of horror until fairly recently. I drew the first one just kind of as a one-off, and then I was like, I like part 2, so I'll draw the women from part 2. There's something about the counselors, the women counselors in part 2 that always really appealed to me. They just seemed the most, 1980 of the bunch. And then I posted that, and then I heard, if the people I was drawing had an Instagram, I would tag them in it, in the hopes, maybe they'll see it, maybe not. And then I got a very nice compliment from Lauren Marie Taylor, who plays Vicky in part 2. Nice. And I was like, well, I guess I'll just keep going and see if I can, we're, more than a year into COVID at that point. It's like, maybe I can wring some compliments out of some further Friday the 13th alumni and make this all worth it. And then it just so happened that I was doing this in the summer. A local bar was, does art shows every month. And my friend Christine said, oh, this would be a good art show for October. Have it up the whole the month of Halloween, and that's what ended up happening. Like even before I had drawn the whole series, so then I was really committed to drawing all of them. Although after I did Freddy versus Jason, I was kind of tired, and I was really wrestling with myself. Like, do I draw the remake? Do I not draw the remake? Because I just couldn't think of anything about it that really inspired me, or even some kind of twist on it. Like the other ones I had done kind of parody versions. Like part 1 was done in the style of one of those like 70s, Hostess fruit pie ads in comic books.
Right.
The characters of Friday the 13th. And then for Jason Takes Manhattan, I did a picture of Jason hosting Saturday Night Live in 89, the year the movie came out, with that whole cast behind him for the good nights and musical guest Eazy-E. And by the time I got to the remake, it's like, I just don't have much to say about this one. I don't...
You just can't have fun with it. You can't do anything amusing with it.
And it doesn't feel like part of the series in a lot of ways. I guess I could have done something with Jason and his weed. But also, it's not one that I, watched a million times, that I got all the stupid nuances of. It's not one that I've quoted with my friends, It's just kind of there. And I don't think it's terrible, but it didn't give me any ideas. So it's like, it doesn't. Yeah. I think I can leave that one out, and that'll be fine. And then I did some kind of one-offs of individual characters from some of the earlier ones. Like I did kind of a cheesecakey drawing of Steve from part 1 with his hairy torso and bandana.
I love that.
Plastic glasses frames and mustache, just kind of holding an axe and with a leg up on a stump and looking sexy.
Love that.
That one came out pretty cool. That one didn't sell. I thought for sure that the sexy Steve would end up on someone's rumpus room wall.
You'd think that Shelley would have reached out to you. He seems to really embrace, that.
I did draw Shelley. Yeah, I drew him in the one for part 3. I did not hear from anybody from part 3. I would have loved to have heard from Shelley. I'm pretty sure I tagged him in it. If he has an Instagram, I would have tagged him in it.
Yeah, all right.
So who else has gotten your artworks from the cast? I mean,
a couple of them actually bought it. Lauren Marie Taylor put the picture of herself like on the wall behind her in her office. So when she's doing like Zooms and things and doing pictures on her Instagram. The interesting thing is she cut out all the other cast members because fuck them. But it's a picture of her, in her seductive Christmas sweater, spritzing perfume down her underpants.
That's amazing.
And she's a very nice person. She's really, that's great. She's really sweet. But that was cool. And a friend of mine said, I was watching the special features for this horror movie that she's in, Girls Night Out. And, the interviews with the cast and the extras were done by Zoom. And he was like, that's your drawing of her behind her on the wall and the extras on Girls Night Out. So like if the number of people who watch the Girls Night Out extras ever like reaches the double digits, I think I'm going to be doing pretty well for myself.
There you go.
And then Darcy DeMoss from part 6, she plays Nikki in part 6. She's the one who gets her face shoved like Tex Avery style through the wall of the RV. She actually bought got the JPEG and like had an enormous size poster blown up of the one I did of her. I did one later that was, there were some characters I'd skipped, and I'd noticed that a lot of them like did crazy dances in the movies they were in. So I did one with all of them on the dance floor from part 8. With her, doing her little dance fucking on top of Court. She had that blown up into a giant poster, and it's on the wall of her home, framed. And she sent me a picture, it's weird because it's a drawing of her fucking a guy.
Yeah.
And the funny thing was, like, she also posted it on Facebook, and she tagged herself, and she tagged her castmate who I drew fucking her. So that might have been weird for him, but it's very surreal to be getting compliments on my work from people I've been watching get naked and murdered for decades.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And the best example being part 4, Judy Aronson, who plays Samantha in part 4. I always loved her. She's great in that one. And she, gets naked and swims out to the inflatable raft. Jason stabs her through the inflatable raft with the spear, and somehow the raft doesn't deflate. You'd think that might happen, but it does kill her.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
It's just it's a little sleight of hand trick on Jason. He's just showing off. Watch how I can stab this girl to death through the
and the flowers are still standing.
He's great at stabbing through things.
And she was complimentary. I heard from her. Tom McLaughlin, who wrote and directed Part 6, bought the poster that I did of Part 6.
Oh, wow.
That's rad.
He seems cool.
He's a really nice guy. And he's really into cartoons and really into a lot of the same stuff I'm into, which I didn't know, when I tagged him or whatever. I was just like, maybe he'll see it. And he sent me a series of very gracious and gushing compliments about how much he loves the style. And, it means more to him because he wrote the movie. He created these characters, and here's me drawing them in I drew Part 6 in the style of the Ernest Goes to Camp poster because it kind of feels like a movie that Ernest would show up in. Maybe he could have been one of the paintball guys, him and Don Knotts and Tim Conway could have been running around.
Didn't the director of Jason Goes to Hell reach out to you as well?
That was not as pleasant of an interaction. So what happened was I had
regardless if we use this or not, I want to hear it.
Oh no, I don't mind if you use it. It's pretty funny actually. So I had posted all of these on Instagram, also on Facebook. On Instagram, I would look to see if they had one and would tag them, but I didn't have any friends. I wasn't friends on Facebook with any of the actors. I tend not to, add famous people or, notorious, horror movie victims as friends on that site. But a friend of mine does. A friend of mine who, in fact, I worked with at Movie Madness and was one of those people that would, drop the quotes into casual conversation. 20 years earlier, a bunch of us got back in touch because there was a book being written about Movie Madness for its anniversary this last year, and that meant getting starting a chat or starting a message thread. And I invited the 15 people I'm still in touch with, but they each invited another 15 that they're in touch with. So it became this big reunion, and to find that we are still all these movie dorks who speak the same language and are on the same wavelength was really exciting. And this guy, Todd, was one of them that I hadn't seen in a long time. Really great guy, really sweet guy. Well, he went through all the Facebook posts I did of these after I had drawn the entire series, and he messaged them to everybody involved with the series who was depicted in them. And from that, I got compliments from Tiffany Helm, who dies robot dancing in Part 5, and got some likes by Tom Matthews, who was also in Return of the Living Dead. So that was kind of a thrill for me. That's maybe my favorite horror movie ever.
Yeah,
and I guess he was so excited to do this. He didn't necessarily look at the commentary that I had written about the movies in the comments.
Oh no!
For Jason Goes to Hell, I had drawn. Well, I made it look like a Happy Meal toy of the time. I Googled a bunch of Happy Meal ads, print ads from 92, I think is when it came out, 92 or 93. And so I made it look like that, where it has a Happy Meal themed Jason Goes to Hell box and some happy kids eating, and then the little toys that come with it, like the girl who had been violently ripped in half, post vivisection, and she's on a little plastic jet ski, and Creighton Duke is driving a donut and hot dog truck and things like that. And then in the comments, the first thing I did was I wrote, okay, here's an alternate drawing of that particular movie, under which I had just drawn a steaming pile of horse shit. Todd messaged it to the director. Just out
Here you go, buddy.
Completely well-meaning enthusiasm.
Of course,
and then,
of course.
In the comments with some other friends, I had talked about how much I hate that movie. Anyway, then I get a comment, and I actually have it in front of me now. Hey, Greg, this is Adam Marcus. Yeah, that Adam Marcus.
Oh, yeah, that one.
I get that you hate my film, which is totally cool by me, but my company is making a documentary about the making of the film, and I like your artwork and wanted to know if you would like it featured in the documentary. If so, let me know and I'll send you an art release. So it's like, oh, okay. You know, I'm being properly chagrined, like, hey, sorry about that. But yeah, apparently it's whenever that documentary is released. I mean, I'm sure it'll just be a quick fleeting glimpse of my Jason Goes to Hell Happy Meal art. But, so yeah, some notoriety.
That's kind of a stand-up guy sort of response.
He didn't seem to take it personally at all.
Yeah, of course. I mean, he's probably been dealing with reactions like that for years over that movie.
Well, I don't think he ever directed anything else afterwards.
Man, peaked early, huh?
I mean, it is. That movie is just everything that sucked about the 90s.
Yeah.
It's just everything that was repellent about the 90s kind of smashed together. It's just violently unpleasant, literally violently unpleasant.
It is. It was the one that I probably had the hardest time sitting through. Like, not as like this is like morally reprehensible or whatever, but just like,
no, from
I don't care.
From a story standpoint, there's so much. There's so much back. Like at number 9 in the series, he's going to try to make sense of a series that has not made any sense.
Yeah,
sure.
And made it more confusing in the process, much more confusing.
But absolutely. At the same time, I can't help but respect it because, like, you are in your 20s, you are directing this giant franchise. You're like, no, I'm going to make it mine. I don't care. I'm gonna make it 100 times worse.
Yeah.
And hell yeah.
And you can tell it was. I mean, they must have re-edited that thing a million times, trying to make some kind of coherent storyline out of it. And I know there were reshoots, and they didn't help very much. Freddy's glove coming up and grabbing the mask is a pretty great moment.
Yeah,
that's the best thing in it.
Is there something particular about like being a horror aficionado? Is there something about Jason that stands apart from the other slashers that you like, maybe in particular about him versus other?
I would say it is my favorite franchise compared to all the other big ones of the time. Freddy, Michael Myers, Leatherface. Not necessarily that I think the movies are better. I mean, obviously, like the first Texas Chainsaw, the first Halloween are better than almost anything else from that time. But there's just a certain simplicity and dumbness to it that is fun for me. I think you could say it's the most fun of any of those. And there's something relatable about the whole, hey, we're going to go out, hang out partying in the woods. That's always a fun premise. It's been used in 10 million horror movies, but they were one of the first to do it. It's a great premise.
Yeah. It's wild how like they felt the need to get away from that. Like I understand you don't want to do the same thing, cover the same ground over and over and over again, but it's so simple and you can do so much with it. He could have done so many more nature-based kills.
Right.
Like killed someone with a shrub somehow. I don't know, but
he would have figured it out.
Throw a raccoon through a skull. I don't know, but
he never seemed to use wildlife in his. Maybe because it's their territory too. He doesn't want to mess with any raccoons.
That's true.
They belong there just as much as he does.
Yeah, maybe he's kind of like Bigfoot. Like he just kind of wanders it, and like he'll wander around the forest, and he'll pause, and like birds will land on him. And
that's exactly
he's a protector
what he is. He's like a force of nature. There's no need really to explain it. They try a couple of times and give up, and then they try to kind of retroactively explain it, and that really doesn't work. And I don't know, maybe just the fact that there's no backstory required. I mean, like even TV series these days are like a million times more serialized than the Friday the 13th series is. You don't need to have seen any of the previous ones.
Jim, do you have any questions?
I mean, my favorite part was just hearing about all the artwork stuff, really. I mean, that is so fantastic. I love it. Like that's where social media can be a force for good. Yeah. Which like those reasons are dropping precipitously, and I think that's so cool,
That's pretty cool, and it's a positive thing to get those comments from them, knowing that it means something to them to hear back from the fans and to see themselves depicted, even if it's in a gross way or a silly way.
It's part of it.
Yeah, and it is still paying off in ways I hadn't anticipated. This project, I did have a big art show for it that was up all month. I sold a couple of them. I've still got a bunch of the originals for sale. If any Friday the 13th fans are listening and would like to,
but
we can definitely post them.
Yeah, I'm calling dibs on that Sexy Steve though. That is.
Okay, that, I'm amazed that I still have that one. I thought that would be the first one to go. I thought, like, well, we live in Portland. That's kind of, it's a 1980s sexy look, but it's also kind of like a current day Portland. Yeah. Like this is whether it's, for women and men, like anyone attracted to men, I think is going to like this.
It's been the current day look since like 2009.
But Steve got there first, and God bless him. And then he got murdered by a woman in a cable knit sweater.
Yep.
While wearing a slicker. How'd you like to be murdered wearing a slicker?
Well, there's a lot of questionable fashion choices that I don't want to be murdered in. Slicker would be. I mean, I wouldn't want to be buried in the slicker. That would be pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, the blood would wash off.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
The slicker would be easiest for like
cleanup.
Clean up and maintenance. Yeah. Way easier than that wheelchair.
The wheelchair one is also fascinating because I think for as much as there's a deal is sort of made about Jason and the machete, I think some of Jason's more interesting kills are the like improv ones, the ones where he doesn't necessarily use a weapon, but that stair one is so brutal and absurd just for how many stairs there are and how it's just like, oh, he got him. Oh my God. Now what's this? Because it's just out of nowhere.
It's like the stairs from the Exorcist or something. All of a sudden, he just keeps on going. That is funny. That would be funny if they made it like a like an MC Escher type of thing, where just a stairway that just keeps on. Like they cut back 20 minutes later in the movie, and he's still going down the stairs.
He's going sideways for some reason.
Or at the end, that's how he's at the end. Like he lands on Jason with his wheelchair.
There you go.
And saves the day. That would have been a better ending.
Took 45 minutes.
Than finding that dog again.
Well, she's giving some whole like Psych 101 thing, like I'm your mom, believe and Jason's kind of paused for a second, confused by what's going on, and then just gets killed by the wheelchair guy. That'd be great.
Yeah. She's Amy Steele. I love her. Great. I think she's the best final girl in the series. She's actually very very good in that movie. She makes that whole scenario seem like almost plausible. And Trish in part 4 also is pretty good, running around with Corey Feldman wearing a weird looking bald cap.
They just didn't give her enough to do. They didn't integrate her with the rest of the cast too much. So
no, they did. She was kind of off on her own doing her. I mean, I'm sure she and the dog were having a good time. It is part 4 has some really great ones through and through. That has I would say the batting average is highest on part 4. I mean, Savini came back specifically because he got to kill Jason, who he had created in the first one. Here's this big chance to off him, and it's 4 is fun to watch. It's really visually great.
When I was putting together that stupid little montage of people being thrown through windows or Jason crashing through windows. The scene in 4 where he grabs one of those twins and throws them through the window. I love that shot.
It's so well
I was
done.
like. I was like, I kind of want to make that like my wallpaper image. Like, that's a woman being murdered. That seems kind of creepy. But it's a cool shot.
The windows
but it's so cool.
Those twins showed up in a Cheers episode, by the way, that I was watching. And I was like, oh, fuck. I saw Jason kill those. And like Sam's going on a hot date with them. It's like, uh-oh, better not be a dead fuck, Sam.
That's it. And the other one is great. Just the body thump against the side of the house.
Yes.
I like that, Jimmy gets killed. Jimmy Crispin Glover. It's such a brutal death.
And then crucified.
It's like 15 feet away from Teddy, who's watching the old, like the ancient silent, like booby films. It's like, you didn't hear that? You didn't hear your friend getting a cleaver to the face?
There's a lot of that in those movies where someone is just screaming in the woods. It's like, don't worry about it.
They're fine.
They're fine. Trees baffle the sound, I guess.
Yeah.
If people want to find your artwork online, where can they find it?
Oh, they have so many choices. I'm on Instagram. My Instagram name is Dollar Taco Night, all one word, NITE. I'm on Redbubble under Greg Bigoni Art. By the time this podcast is posted, I'm going to have some digitally refurbished versions of a lot of my Friday the 13th art up on the Redbubble, and you can buy it on all kinds of products.
Couldn't you get it like a pillowcase or something? I thought there was one.
That's not even the weirdest thing. You can get like shower curtains and giant comforters. I'm really wanting someone to buy like a giant comforter of Jason skewering someone that I drew. It costs like $200 and just have that in your home.
I want Kane Hodder to get that simply because I like the idea of a guy with kill tattooed on his lip sleeping under cartoon characters like that. Just
cartoons,
of himself.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Oh, thanks for letting me be a part of this.
And we will put your links and whatever in the episode description in the on our social media stuff, so the teens of listeners that we have can find you. All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
So yeah, just to wrap this up, Jason started as a Pamela Voorhees whodunit slasher, and now he's in comics. He's in, I think, 3 video games have been made. There was a TV series for a while. I even saw a Nike commercial that appeared during the Olympics that was had to be taken down after it was after people complained. It was a woman putting on her sneakers to run away from a guy that's like very clearly like supposed to be Jason, but he's got a chainsaw, so it's just kind of like an amalgam of your like 80s slashers type of thing. I think that there's a Jason reference in most Treehouse of Horror Simpsons. Maybe not all, but there's quite a bit of them I can think of off the top of my head. But the fun fact of the 80s where a mass killer became like a pop culture icon and was on talk shows and the such. So
it's weird. It really drives home the idea, and I don't remember who said this quote, but the past is a foreign country. Where it's so bizarre to think about this character like seizing the zeitgeist. Like it's all about this guy, because I still like, as much as I love it, and we talked to Greg a little bit about, like being a kid and watching it and that, and having that kind of nostalgia for the 80s. But it's weird now. It's with our accessibility to everything, to have this idea that this was like a draw for people to the theaters and it was going to ruin society, and all that. It's just weird that was, particularly for how tame it seems now that this was such a force. And speaking of the video game thing, I just found out recently that, because I had played the video game once and wasn't that stoked on it, the new one. But they motion captured Kane Hodder doing kills. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. I should go back and check it out just for that, just to have Jason kill me so I could see it.
Yes, because is it true that you can play as Jason or you can play as a counselor?
Yeah.
So it's fun either way.
Right. Yeah.
It's survival if you're running from him, and it's hunting if you're playing as Jason.
In those kind of games, I tend to be more the survivor. I like hiding more than killing people. But,
than anything. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for joining us on our first series. It was a long one, actually, and I think now we can reveal what we're going to do next time.
What is next?
We are going to take potentially a week off so we can watch a few of these, read a few books, that kind of thing. But we'll probably try to have something in the feed for you. But we are going to tackle Don Coscarelli's Phantasm series next time. This one's pretty near and dear to me. As much as I do love Friday the 13th and I do love Jason, I'm looking forward to something more fantastical, something a little weirder. And Phantasm definitely does that. If you're a Friday the 13th fan and you haven't seen Phantasm, there is a new version out, pristine, cleaned up print that was championed by, of all people, J.J. Abrams of Force Awakens fame, of Star Trek Into Darkness fame. But
ooh, twist
I hate
the knife.
That movie.
Yeah, rightfully so.
Yes. But hey, if the man brought his resources together to really put out a nice version of the classic, I think 1979 Phantasm, I believe, he's all good in my book.
Right.
Do your homework, watch Phantasm 2. Yeah, we'll be back in a week or so to keep this going.
Yeah, excited to see it because I really like the first one. And then there are other movies. So we'll see. I've only seen the first 2, but parts of the other ones. So this will be a fun trip. And I'm curious because as Jason was, like I said, holding the zeitgeist, like grabbed hold of the zeitgeist, Phantasm has just been its own thing for years. No, there's not a lot of like, hell yeah, Phantasm, in popular culture, the same way there is for Jason. Yes. So that'll be exciting.
And if you want to, if you want us to do, Michael Myers and Texas Chainsaw and stuff, we will get to it. We just thought we would dip a little bit outside and go like a smaller one, and then we'll be back to the bigger ones.
There's a lot of franchises out there of differing scope. and we want to check them all out.
All right, so join us next week for Phantasm.
So long.
Bye-bye. This has been a Two Penguins media production. It was produced by James Strayer and edited by John C. Myers. Logo by Ethan Kimberling and music by Michael Arthur Holloway, who you can find on Bandcamp. Follow us on Instagram at This May Hurt a Bit Pod and on Twitter at Hurt a Bit. Email us at thismayhurtabit@gmail.com. And if you are so inclined, rate and review us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll see you next time.